What happens when a Texas oil billionaire desperately needs a fake bride to inherit his grandfather's empire? But the woman who answers his ad is a corporate spy sent by his ruthless rival. She came to steal his secrets. He needed her to fool his dying grandfather, but neither expected to discover that the rival who sent her was the same man who murdered her father 15 years ago. This is a story where deception becomes truth, where fake love turns real, and where the biggest fortune isn't measured in oil barrels, but in finding the one person worth fighting for. Hit that like button and subscribe to witness how two liars discover the most dangerous truth of all. Love billionaire oil rancher's fake bride is corporate spy, but his rival killed her father. Letter trembled in Jackson Hart's weathered hands as he stood on the balcony of his 30,000-acre ranch, watching oil derricks pump black gold from the Texas earth like mechanical prayers to capitalism. At 35, he controlled Hart Energy, an empire worth $8 billion. But in 72 hours, he would lose everything unless he produced what his dying grandfather demanded. A wife. The old man Samuel Hart, patriarch of the Hart oil dynasty, lay dying in the mansion's master suite, clutching to life with the same iron grip he'd used to build his fortune. His final decree was simple and cruel. Jackson would inherit everything only if he was married. No wife, no empire. The fortune would go to Jackson's cousin Marcus Steele, who ran the rival Steel Corporation and had been circling Hart Energy like a vulture for years. The advertisement had been desperate, specific, and secret. Businessman seeks temporary wife for inheritance purposes. 6 months commitment. $5 million payment. Complete confidentiality required. Must be convincing actress. Only one response had met his requirements. Alexandra Chen, 28, from San Francisco. Her resume was impressive. MBA from Wharton experience in corporate consulting, fluent in 4 languages. Her photo showed an elegant woman with intelligent eyes that seemed to see through the camera. She was perfect. Too perfect, perhaps, but Jackson didn't have time for suspicion. Now she was arriving, and Jackson felt the weight of his deception mixing with something else, a strange anticipation he hadn't expected. The helicopter touched down on the ranch's private helipad, desert dust, swirling like golden smoke in the afternoon sun. Alexandra stepped out with the grace of someone accustomed to making entrances. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, her dark hair pulled back to reveal a face that was beautiful in a way that suggested danger rather than softness. When their eyes met, Jackson felt a jolt of recognition he couldn't explain. Mr. Hart. Her voice carried a slight accent he couldn't place, professional warmth overlaying something sharper. Miss Chen, thank you for coming on such short notice. $5 million buys a lot of urgency. Her directness caught him off guard. The other candidates had been eager to please, desperate for the money. This woman acted like she was doing him a favor. The ride to the main house passed through oil fields and cattle pastures, the old and new wealth of Texas existing in uneasy harmony. Alexandra studied everything with eyes that missed nothing. Security cameras, guard positions, the location of office buildings. You're observant, Jackson noted. I like to know my surroundings, especially when I'm about to lie to a dying man. Does that bother you? Should it bother you that it doesn't? They looked at each other, two people recognizing kindred spirits in deception. What Jackson didn't know was that Alexandra had been studying him for months, sent by Marcus Steele to infiltrate Hart Energy and steal the geological surveys that would reveal the location of untapped oil reserves worth billions. What Alexandra didn't know was that those same oil fields had been discovered using technology stolen from her father's company before he died in a suspicious plane crash 15 years ago. The mansion sprawled across the waterscape like a monument to excess. 50 rooms, most empty, all maintained as if a family of dozens still lived there instead of one lonely billionaire and his dying grandfather. It's impressive, Alexandra said, though her tone suggested she had seen better. It's a mausoleum. My grandfather built it for a dynasty that never materialized. My father died in an oil rig explosion when I was 12. My mother left shortly after. It's been just grandfather and me for 23 years. And now me, for 6 months, if we're convincing. Jackson led her to the suite he'd prepared, close enough to his to maintain appearances, far enough to preserve boundaries. Alexandra surveyed it with the same analytical eye she'd applied to everything else. Tell me about your grandfather. What will convince him? He's sharp even dying. Samuel Hart didn't build an empire by being fooled easily. He'll test you. How? He'll ask about details, how we met your family, our plans. He has investigators, so our story needs to be airtight. Alexandra sat gracefully in an antique chair that probably cost more than most people's houses. Then we better create a believable fiction. They spent hours crafting their lie. They'd met at an energy conference in Houston 6 months ago. She'd been consulting for a firm analyzing market trends. He'd been impressed by her presentation on emerging markets. Coffee led to dinner, dinner to love. Why keep it secret? Alexandra asked. I wanted to be sure it was real before involving my grandfather. He's tried to arrange marriages for me before. And your cousin Marcus Steele? Jackson's face darkened. Marcus is a vulture who's been trying to destroy Hart Energy for years. His father and my grandfather were partners once until my grandfather bought him out. The Steeles have been bitter ever since. Alexandra filed this information away, careful not to show how much she already knew. Marcus had told her a different story, that Samuel Hart had stolen the company, destroyed his father, and built his empire on theft and betrayal. When do I meet your grandfather? Tonight. Dinner. He insists on formal meals even though he can barely eat. It's about control, showing he's still the king of his castle. And after dinner, we convince him we're in love, get married within the week, and maintain the illusion until... Jackson paused. Until he passes. The doctors say 3 months at most. And then I disappear with $5 million. And I keep my company. They shook hands, a business deal sealed. Alexandra's hand was soft, but her grip was firm, and Jackson found himself holding on a moment longer than necessary. That evening, Alexandra transformed. The business attire gave way to an elegant evening gown that made her look like she'd been born to wealth. Jackson, despite himself, stared. You clean up well, he said. So do you. He did. The casual ranch wear was replaced by a perfectly tailored suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. They looked like a power couple, which was exactly the point. The dining room was absurdly formal for 3 people. Samuel Hart sat at the head of the table, thin as paper, but with eyes that still burned with intelligence and suspicion. He was connected to an oxygen tank, but his voice remained strong. So you're the woman who finally caught my grandson. I prefer to think we caught each other, Alexandra replied smoothly. Samuel studied her with the intensity of a man who had spent his life reading people. Chen, Chinese half. My mother was from Shanghai. My father was American. What did he do? He was an inventor, developed drilling technology before he died. Jackson saw something flicker in Samuel's eyes. Recognition, guilt. But the old man simply nodded. And you fell in love with my grandson at a conference. How romantic. The sarcasm was thick, but Alexandra smiled. I fell in love with his mind first. His passion for innovation, for pushing boundaries. The fact that he's handsome was just a bonus. Jackson doesn't believe in love. I raised him better than that. You raised him to be alone, Alexandra countered gently. But everyone needs someone, Mr. Hart. Even kings of industry. Samuel laughed, a sound like rustling leaves. You have spine. Good. Jackson needs someone who won't let him become me, rich and dying alone. The dinner continued with Samuel's interrogation. He asked about her education, her family, her intentions. Alexandra answered perfectly, weaving truth with fiction so seamlessly that even Jackson almost believed they were really engaged. But after dinner, when Samuel had been helped to his room, Jackson confronted her. You knew about my father. When you mentioned drilling technology, you were testing my grandfather. Everyone in the energy industry knows about Thomas Chen's innovations. Thomas Chen was your father. Alexandra went very still. How do you know that name? My grandfather mentioned him once, said he was brilliant but reckless. Died in a plane crash. Murdered, you mean? The word hung between them like an accusation. That was never proven. Lots of things are never proven in the oil business, Mr. Hart. Doesn't make them less true. She turned to leave, but Jackson caught her arm. If you're here for revenge, I'm here for $5 million. Whatever happened to my father was 15 years ago. I was 13. I've made my peace with it. But her eyes said otherwise, and Jackson realized his perfect fake fiancée might be more dangerous than he'd imagined. The next days fell into a rhythm of performed intimacy. Alexandra and Jackson appeared at breakfast together, held hands during walks around the ranch that Samuel could observe from his window, and shared tender looks over dinner. For the dying patriarch's benefit, they were the perfect couple. But at night, when the performance ended, they circled each other with growing suspicion and unexpected attraction. "Tell me about your father," Jackson said one evening, as they sat by the pool maintaining appearances for the security cameras Samuel monitored. "Why, Bahoya? Because if we're supposed to be in love, I should know about your family." Alexandra was quiet for a long moment, her reflection wavering in the pool's surface. Thomas Chen was brilliant. He developed a revolutionary drilling sensor that could detect oil deposits with 90% accuracy. Every major oil company wanted it. What happened? He was going to sell the technology to the highest bidder, had meetings scheduled with Hart Energy Steel Corporation and others, but his plane crashed on the way to the final negotiations. The technology disappeared. Within a year, Hart Energy announced a miraculous new discovery method that tripled your reserves. Jackson felt cold despite the Texas heat. "You think my grandfather killed your father?" "I know someone did. The plane crash was ruled accidental, but my mother never believed it. She spent 5 years investigating before she died of what everyone called grief. But I call giving up. And you, what do you call it?" "Unfinished business." They sat in silence, the weight of history between them. Jackson wanted to deny it to defend his grandfather, but he'd seen too much of the old man's ruthlessness to dismiss the possibility entirely. "If it's true," he said carefully, "if my grandfather was involved, what would you do?" "I don't know. I've spent 15 years imagining revenge, but sitting here, seeing him dying, what would be the point? You can't punish a ghost." "I'm not a ghost." "No," she said, looking at him with eyes that held too many emotions to name. "You're not." The next morning brought crisis. Marcus Steele arrived unannounced, his silver Bentley crunching up the gravel drive like an invading army. Jackson met him at the door, Alexandra standing beside him in a show of unity that was only half performance. "Cousin of," Marcus said, with a smile that never reached his eyes, "I heard you got engaged. How sudden?" Marcus was everything Jackson wasn't. Smooth where Jackson was, rough polished where Jackson was authentic, cruel where Jackson was merely hard. He looked at Alexandra with an expression of ownership that made Jackson's hands clench. "Alexandra Chen," Marcus continued, "we've met before, haven't we?" "I don't believe so," Alexandra said calmly, but Jackson felt her tense beside him. "No, I could swear I've seen you at industry events. You have such a memorable face." The threat was subtle but clear. Marcus knew something. They endured an excruciating lunch where Marcus probed their relationship with surgical precision. He asked about details that shouldn't matter, dates that were hard to keep straight, stories that required perfect synchronization. Alexandra handled it brilliantly, deflecting, redirecting, occasionally touching Jackson's hand with such natural affection that even Marcus seemed partially convinced. But after he left, Alexandra collapsed into a chair, shaking. "He knows." "Knows what?" "That I'm," she stopped herself. "That you're what Alexandra, I am." She looked at him, and for the first time since she had arrived, Jackson saw real fear in her eyes. "I need to tell you something. But not here, somewhere without cameras." They rode horses out to the far edge of the property to an old oil derrick that had run dry decades ago. It stood like a metal skeleton against the sky, a monument to extracted wealth. "Marcus hired me," Alexandra said without preamble. Jackson felt the words like physical blows, but forced himself to remain still. "To do what?" "To get close to you, to access your geological surveys, to find out where the new reserves are. And the 5 million, the advertisement. I was going to apply anyway when Marcus approached me. He offered me 10 million to spy on you plus whatever you were paying. So everything has been a lie." "Not everything." Alexander dismounted, pacing in the dust. "My father really was Thomas Chen. He really did die mysteriously, and I really did come here thinking Hart Energy was responsible. But now I think Marcus knows more than he's told me. The way he talked about your grandfather, about the old days, there was something personal there, something beyond business rivalry." Jackson dismounted too, moving closer to her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because last night I accessed your grandfather's private files." "How?" "I'm good at what I do, or I was until I read what was in those files. She pulled out a flash drive. Your grandfather kept records of everything, including correspondence with my father from 15 years ago. Thomas Chen wasn't going to sell to the highest bidder. He'd already made a deal with Hard Energy. The contracts were signed. The technology was yours legally. Then why Marcus Steele, or rather his father Richard Steele? They tried to steal the technology, sabotage the deal. There was going to be a legal battle. Then my father's plane crashed, the technology disappeared, and everyone assumed Hard Energy had stolen it. But we already owned it? Exactly. Your grandfather didn't need to kill my father. He'd already won. Jackson took the flash drive, their fingers touching in the exchange. This proves Marcus's father was involved in your father's death. Maybe, or maybe it proves nothing. Files can be faked, records altered, but there's more. She pulled out another document. A payment from Steel Corporation to a private military contractor. 3 days before my father's plane crashed. $50,000 for consultation services. That's not proof. No, but it's enough to make me question everything Marcus told me. They stood facing each other in the shadow of the dead derrick, two people caught in a web of lies that stretched back 15 years. What do you want to do? Jackson asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to run. Take the money from both of you and disappear. Part of me wants to destroy everyone connected to my father's death. And part of me... What? Part of me wants to kiss you, which is insane because you're supposed to be my enemy. Jackson stepped closer. I'm not your enemy, Alexandra. You're not my friend either. No, but I could be something else. The kiss was inevitable, two people drawn together by forces stronger than logic. It was desperate and sweet, angry and tender, full of history and possibility. When they broke apart, Alexandra was crying. This doesn't change anything. I'm still a spy. You're still lying to your grandfather. We're still two people trying to make sense of a situation neither of us created. Jackson interrupted. Your father's dead. My grandfather's dying. Marcus is circling like a vulture. And in the middle of all of it, I'm falling for you. You can't. I'm literally being paid to betray you. Then don't. Stay with me. Help me fight Marcus. Help me find the truth about your father. And your grandfather. We still have to convince him we're real. Maybe we don't have to convince him of anything. That night they went to Samuel's room together. The old man was weaker, but his eyes remained sharp. You have something to tell me, he said. It wasn't a question. Jackson looked at Alexandra, who nodded. Grandfather, this is Alexandra Chen, Thomas Chen's daughter. Samuel's face went very still. I know. The silence in Samuel Hart's bedroom stretched like a taut wire ready to snap at the slightest pressure. The old man's labored breathing through the oxygen mask was the only sound as three people recalculated everything they thought they knew. You knew. Jackson's voice carried betrayal deeper than any business deception. You knew who she was from the beginning. Samuel's eyes, still sharp despite his body's decay, moved between Jackson and Alexandra. I knew Thomas Chen had a daughter. When you mentioned the name Alexandra Chen, the age matched. When I saw her face, she has her father's eyes. And you said nothing. Alexandra stepped forward, 15 years of grief and anger radiating from her controlled posture. What would you have me say? That I was sorry? That I knew your father? That I... Samuel coughed a harsh sound that brought blood to his lips. That I failed to protect him. The last words hung in the air like a confession. Jackson moved to help his grandfather, but the old man waved him off with surprising strength. Sit, both of you. If I'm going to die with secrets, at least let me die with truth. They sat and Samuel began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of decades. Thomas Chen was more than a business partner. He was my friend. Perhaps the only real friend I ever had in this cutthroat industry. We met in the early days when oil was still about wildcatters and dreams, not corporations and spreadsheets. He paused, gathering strength. The drilling sensor technology wasn't just his invention. We developed it together unofficially. Late nights in his garage, testing theories, arguing about applications. It was the most alive I'd felt since your grandmother died, Jackson. Alexandra's hands clenched in her lap. Then why did he die? Because Richard Steele found out about our partnership. He saw it as betrayal. You see, Richard Marcus's father was my original partner. We built hard energy together. But Richard was greedy, reckless. He wanted to cut corners, bribe officials, destroy competitors. I bought him out to save the company from his corruption. Samuel's eyes grew distant, seeing into the past. Richard never forgave me. When he learned about Thomas and the technology, he saw an opportunity for revenge. He approached Thomas, first offered him double what I could pay. But Thomas refused. He believed in loyalty and friendship. So Richard killed him. Alexandra's voice was steady, but tears tracked down her cheeks. I can't prove it. But 3 days before Thomas was to sign the final papers, Richard visited me, said I should be careful, that planes crash all the time, that friends can become liabilities. I thought it was just threats, bluster. Richard was always dramatic. Samuel reached in for a drawer in his bedside table with trembling fingers. He pulled out a worn envelope. Thomas gave me this the day before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I should take care of his family. There's a bank account. 15 years of interest. It's substantial. Alexandra took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter in her father's handwriting and bank documents showing an account worth over $50 million. You've been growing this for 15 years. It was meant for your mother, but she died before I could find a way to give it to her without raising questions. Then for you, but you disappeared into the foster system. Then university, I kept track, but from a distance. Why? Jackson asked, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. Because I failed to protect my friend. The least I could do was protect his legacy. Samuel looked at Alexandra. You're not here by accident, are you? This isn't about Jackson's inheritance, Marcus Steele hired me to spy on hard energy, Alexandra admitted, to steal geological data. Samuel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Of course he did. Richard's son continuing the family tradition of taking what isn't his. But I can't do it, Alexandra continued. Not now, not knowing. Knowing what? That your father was murdered, that I benefited from his death even if I didn't cause it. That Jackson is innocent of sins committed before he was even running the company. Knowing that you loved him, Alexandra said simply. My father, I can see it in your eyes. You loved him like a brother. I did, and I've been dying of that guilt as much as this cancer. Jackson stood pacing to the window. Outside, the oil derricks continued their endless pumping, extracting wealth from ancient death. The metaphor wasn't lost on him. Marcus is coming back tomorrow, he said. He knows something's off. If Alexandra doesn't deliver the information, he'll expose her as a spy, the marriage is fake, and claim the inheritance, Samuel finished. Unless what? Samuel smiled, the expression transforming his death mask into something almost youthful. Unless we give him exactly what he wants, but not in the way he expects. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Alexandra would give Marcus the geological surveys, but they would be falsified, showing massive reserves in locations that were actually dry. Marcus would invest billions in worthless land, while hard energy quietly developed the real reserves. It's fraud, Jackson pointed out. It's justice, Samuel countered. Richard Steele stole Thomas Chen's life. His son is trying to steal our company. Let him steal lies instead. And us, Alexandra asked, looking at Jackson. What happens to us? You get married, Samuel said firmly. Not for the inheritance. I'm changing my will tonight to leave everything to Jackson regardless. You get married because you're in love, even if you're too stubborn to admit it. We barely know each other, Jackson protested. You know enough. You know she's brave enough to face her father's killer. She knows you're honorable enough to care about justice over profit. That's more than most couples know after decades. That night, Alexandra met Marcus at a remote location Jackson hidden nearby for protection. Marcus was accompanied by two men who looked like they broke bones for a living. The data, Marcus demanded without preamble. Alexandra handed over the flash drive. Everything. Geological surveys, reserve estimates, even the new underwater drilling sites. Marcus smiled, the expression making him look like his father's son. And Jackson suspects nothing. He's too busy planning a wedding. Ah, yes, the wedding. You've done well, Alexandra. Though I am curious, when did you realize I killed your father? The words landed like bombs in the darkness. Alexandra went very still. I didn't, until now. Marcus laughed. Please, you think I hired you randomly? I knew exactly who you were. Thomas Chen's daughter, the perfect weapon against heart energy. Your hatred would make you believable. You killed him, not your father. You. I was 20, eager to prove myself. Father said whoever solved the Thomas Chen problem would inherit the company. So I solved it. A small explosive device in the plane's engine. Simple, effective, untraceable. Alexandra's hand moved toward her purse where a recorder was capturing every word. Of course, Marcus continued, you won't live to use that recording. His men stepped forward, but suddenly the night erupted with lights and sirens. FBI agents swarmed the area, weapons drawn. Jackson emerged from hiding, and with him Samuel Hart, wheelchair-bound, but very much present. You always were too eager to confess, Marcus, Samuel said. Your father's weakness, too. The need to brag about your crimes. Marcus tried to run but was tackled by an agent. As they cuffed him, he screamed at Samuel, you set me up, you dying bastard. You set me up. I protected my family, Samuel replied, something your father never understood. Family isn't just blood, it's choice, and I choose them. He gestured to Jackson and Alexandra. The next morning, the news of Marcus Steele's arrest for murder and corporate espionage dominated headlines. The fake geological data he'd already acted on would bankrupt Steele Corporation within months. Alexandra and Jackson stood in the garden where Samuel had asked to be brought. The old man was fading fast now, as if holding on for justice had been all that kept him alive. The wedding, he wheezed. I want to see it. Grandfather, you need to rest. I need to see my grandson marry the woman he loves before I die. And you do love her, don't you, Jackson? Jackson looked at Alexandra, this woman who'd entered his life as a lie, but become his truth. Yes. And you, Alexandra Chen, do you love my grandson? Alexandra took Jackson's hand. I came here for vengeance and found forgiveness. I came for money and found meaning. I came to destroy and found myself wanting to build. Yes, I love him. Then marry now, today. Let me see something good come from all this death. They married that afternoon in the garden with Samuel as witness and the ranch workers as congregation. It was nothing like the elaborate fake wedding they'd planned, and everything like the real commitment neither had expected. Samuel died that night, peaceful at last. His last words were for Alexandra. Take care of him. He's more like Thomas than he knows. Brilliant, loyal, and terrible at seeing his own worth. 6 months later, Alexandra stood in the same garden, now green with spring growth. The false marriage contract had long been torn up, replaced by a real marriage that needed no pretense. Her father's technology, recovered from Marcus's files, was being used to find clean energy alternatives to oil. The Chen Hart Foundation, funded by both families' fortunes, supported families who'd lost loved ones to corporate violence. Jackson found her there as he always did when she needed to think. Any regrets, he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. About Marcus, about the lies, about how we started, about any of it. Alexandra turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become her home. How can I regret the path that brought me to you? My father died seeking justice. I found it in the son of his friend. My mother died of grief. I found healing in the arms of someone who understood loss. I came as a spa and became a wife. And I advertised for a fake bride and found my real partner. They stood together as the sun set over the ranch, painting the oil derricks gold. The machines continued their endless pumping, but now they seemed less like monuments to greed and more like reminders that even from the deepest deposits of death and time, something valuable could be extracted if you were willing to dig deep enough to push through the darkness to find the light. Your grandfather was right, Alexandra said softly. About what? We're terrible at seeing our own worth, but perfect at seeing each other's. As night fell over the Hart Ranch, two people who'd started as enemies stood united, proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction, but at transformation. That the greatest inheritance isn't at money, but at meaning, and that love can bloom even in soil poisoned by decades of betrayal. The oil would eventually run dry, the money would eventually run out. But what Jackson and Alexandra had found in each other, truth born from lies, love born from loss, and justice born from revenge, would flow endless as the Texas sky, deep as the wells that had brought them together, invaluable beyond any measure the old kings of oil could have imagined.